coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
It's easy for the casual observer and even the professional observer to just slip into a mode where, if you see something making headlines in the mainstream media, it's because it is a PR operation. It's because it's a psychological operation. It's because it's a form of narrative warfare designed to control your minds, which, these are the same people who post these TED Talks, how social media controls your mind. And it's like, well, that's what business you're in too. And you don't like the fact that people who aren't you are doing the mind control. So, welcome to the 21st century.
Welcome once again to the Roundtable, the weekly podcast of the editors and publisher at The American Mind. This is it. This is the episode in which I reveal that for weeks on end now, I've had Ryan Williams bound and gagged in the basement of my new Nashville home. I'm never letting him out. This is my podcast now. And that faint wailing you may hear is his death gasps as I claim my supremacy. So I'm hosting again this week and in perpetuity. This is a coup. And it happened right under your noses. I am joined today by fellow insurrectionists, by my co-conspirators, founding editor of The American Mind, Matthew Peterson, managing editor Seth Barron, and executive editor James Poulos. Lots going on in the news today, much of it ominous. We begin with Chinese space nukes. This kind of, as it were, flew under the radar. Sorry, I didn't plan on that. It just happened. China has reportedly tested an orbital vehicle, I'm reading from Forbes, that fitted with a nuclear warhead could strike the United States from the south, effectively evading many of the U.S. military's early warning radars. Financial Times journalists Dmitry Sevastopoulos and Catherine Hill first reported the August test of the Potential Fractional Orbital Bombardment System, or FOBS. This is back on the 16th. It's a hypersonic nuke. It's a weapon that puts our capacity to defend against it to shame. It belies also our sort of wishful thinking about China being more interested in kind of friendly economic relations than in world conquest, or at least Taiwanese conquest and anti-American antagonism. It's bad news bears. It just looks really it looks shameful for America to be caught off guard like this. It looks scary for China to be aggressing and building its arsenal in this way. Not that we didn't sort of know or suspect that this was going on, but it does strike me at least, as kind of a watershed moment, except that nobody's paying attention because everything else is kind of falling apart in the States at home. Jen Psaki, everybody's favorite press secretary, responded to this by saying, well, we wouldn't want this to escalate into antagonism, but, quote, we welcome stiff competition in the sphere, just to remind everybody of nuclear arms is what we're talking about here. So at the risk of becoming too breathless, I'm going to just hand this over to the guys straight away. I mean, this is not, I wouldn't think, discordant with what we already thought about both the Biden administration and China, but still more shocking than it's given credit for, no?
To a degree. I mean, this technology has been around in sort of nascent form or developing form for a while. There's reason to believe that the U.S. has been developing this technology as well to some extent. Russia, others, hypersonic missiles are so hot right now, to borrow a phrase. What struck me about this report was the detail that yet again our intelligence agencies were apparently caught completely by surprise. How could this be happening? And things have degraded to a point where we can't even be sure that this is true, that it's not just simply a claim that we've been caught by surprise. As part of the shadow war that is unfolding around the world, there's a very clear rationale for why the defense establishment would want to portray this as a shock. given what's going on behind the scenes with China and how it appears the Biden administration is now making no illusions about its complete embrace of wokeness as explicitly a grand strategy to distinguish itself against the Chinese model of digital life. So the trust gap is probably bigger between the American people and the military intelligence establishment than the hypersonic missile gap, and I'm not sure that is that's going to change, even if these weapons end up being deployed.
Yeah, it kind of. I mean, I could be wrong about this, but it almost seems as though the American elite and like Jen Psaki, their attitude would be like, well, that's fine if that's the theater of war that they want to pursue. Their gains in. We're really focused on expanding, the reduction of stigma for, non-traditional gender expression. We're interested in, pursuing equality of outcome at the educational level. Like, I really feel like that they've reified their terms such that they think that like these woke categories are something real, like that this actually, like, if you change the way we talk about race or gender or any of these things, that they necessarily have a real world effect. I'm surprised that we haven't seen a reduction in the test gap or the wage gap, given that how many the way we've changed the population in television commercials. It's almost like they're like, well, if that's what the Chinese want to spend their time doing, good for them. Let's see who comes out ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it does return me to a theme that we were kind of mulling last week, I think, of this distinction between like the shadows on the cave wall and kind of bedrock realities of human interactions and politics, right? Like there is a sense, and I confess myself kind of guilty to this in an emotional way, even if not in an intellectual way, right? There's this sense in which like nuclear war just, we don't believe it would ever happen. Like we just don't have it. We've gone through enough kind of threats of it, or we remember the story about the Cold War enough that we just feel like, nah, that'll never occur. This is the 21st century, like countries resolve their differences peaceably. And so we feel kind of as if it's an equal, like you say, Seth, like this is just kind of all equal. Maybe you like play with your nuclear toys over there and we, adjust the demographic knobs on our television shows over here. And the collision between those ideas is kind of I think, illustrated by the shocked reaction out of our chattering classes that like the Taliban isn't electing women to positions of power in its new regime in Afghanistan. Right? Well, I don't get it. Like this is aren't they paying attention? Aren't they tuned in? Like this is what we're all doing now. And it's the same sense that we had with the economic stuff we talked about last week, that like these very, very basic ground realities, like people going to the grocery store, opening their wallet and not having enough money, or conversely, not seeing enough things on the shelves to like feed their family, drive their car, yada, yada. Those are being contrasted against this willful fantasy world that just like, doesn't blink, it seems. There's just nothing that will cause a Pete Buttigieg or a Jen Psaki or a Rachel Levine to like acknowledge the facts on the ground. It's sheer force of fantasy versus sheer force of reality. And I don't know, like whether the stone hits the pitcher or the pitcher hits the stone, it's going to be bad luck for the U.S.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think about this concept a lot, Spencer, that we got used to the idea that weapons that are really all over the world that are exceptionally deadly will just never be used. And that's our baseline understanding, that we don't really have to worry about nukes. No one really is worried about it. and certainly not from China. And there's obviously good reasons for that, but there is it's just a sign of, I think, a more general complacency when it comes to foreign policy and, frankly, domestic policy as well, where we've calcified and we've become corrupt, and there is a late republic vibe to it where that can't happen. And there's a police station being burnt down in a major city, and that's a peaceful protest. And the emperor wears very fine clothes, and you see it here. And I think what you see it in the response, you see it. Psaki, I mean, this woman is astoundingly, for me, because I probably hate Fauci or Fauci's image more than almost anyone on the contemporary scene that I've ever seen. It just brings out a visceral reaction in me. But the White House press secretary is definitely gaining ground every day. There's something about her and her whole demeanor and the way she responds that I think is meta, right? It represents, like Fauci, an entire genre or kind of person. And in her case, it really represents a kind of response, the response of exactly shrugging the shoulders, and everything that happens that seems very alarming is actually fine, and we're okay. And I guess, I mean, you're right about what we said last time, but I wonder how far that goes, because it certainly is. It won't be if in fact these things continue to happen, and there's visceral physical repercussions of things not being in the grocery store, or a bomb going off somewhere, or just simple slowly developing military superiority leading to one side having to submit to all kinds of demands, even if no soldiers actually go overseas at all. If all that happens, it wouldn't be the first time that a populace just kept on rolling and rolling and rolling and remaining in denial, even as the world actually crashed around them. It doesn't. There may be no necessity, right, that there is a revolt or a counter movement, and no matter how much we might wish it so. It wouldn't be the first time that that's happened, and that's what, when you see these kind of headlines about China, like that's what's so worrisome. There's the sign of this larger trend.
I mean, I'm just fascinated, and Spencer and I talked about this yesterday on the mini podcast, by this insistence on the left that what everyone thinks of as a supply chain problem is like this massive logistical screw up and rising prices and inflation is really just the sign of a supercharged economy that Joe Biden has pulled us into. And we're just seeing all of this astounding pent up demand as people just want to buy stuff because they were, after 4 years of privation under Trump, now people are back to work. Their wallets are fat. They want to buy, they want to travel. And that's why prices are going up. And all this demand is just crowding the ports. Like, what are you talking about? This is like so amazing. It's such a staggering inversion of reality. I don't know. Has anybody, have any of the leftist economists who should know better, like the moderate ones, or anyone said anything about this? Well, that's not how it works. It does seem like we're entering this new world of complete disregard for reality. I mean, maybe it's always been that way.
Well, Seth, first of all, I just have to correct you. The politically correct term is micro podcast, not mini podcast. We in the micro podcast community are.
So sorry.
No, I spent for my sins this morning. I spent like an hour or so wading through Jennifer Psaki tapes because I was writing about her for the site, and it did occur to me as I was thinking about that narrative, which, as you said on the micro podcast, was a Buttigieg narrative, and then got picked up that, our ports runneth over because people are so, booming, building back better. It's like the Trump eras, or the lean Trump years, are over. And now, that narrative plus the the absolutely crazy border patrol people on horses with whips narrative, a couple of these just stories, it's like, oh, and the we welcome the stiff competition quote, it's like she seems to be kind of flying alone. Like, that's the moment in which you would expect a vaguely competent administration, somebody higher up than her, to come in and be like, this was poorly phrased, this was sort of transparently wrong, and we just wanted to clarify that, we don't welcome stiff competition in the region of nuclear war. Like, that's really not what we're going for. Perhaps in the economic sphere, like, there are any number of things that you would expect, like a president who was compos mentis and checked in and with it to say, like, crickets. She's just sort of like, everybody's sort of like out there just flailing around saying whatever the hell. Like, why not? Just sure, like, say this. And I think the unmooring from reality causes it, like, just not to matter. Like, when you don't have a good editor, you can just kind of like go rogue. And yeah, it all feels a bit unreal. Speaking of fantasy world, I wanted to introduce our second topic, which dovetails really into this one quite perfectly, so we can keep talking about both of these things. But we did want to note this, the first openly transgender, I'm trying to get this right here, the first openly transgender 4-star officer in the nation's armed services, Rachel Levine. Dr. Rachel Levine, Assistant Secretary for Health at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, openly transgender, as opposed to all of the like secret 4-star admirals who were in private, like injecting testosterone that nobody knew about. This is like openly transgender. This great victory, as Levine put it, this is a momentous occasion, and I'm honored to take this role for the impact that I can make and for the historic nature of what it symbolizes. I stand on the shoulders of those LGBTQ plus individuals who came before me, both those known and unknown, presumably referring there to all those secret trannies in the State Department. I'm sorry. The concept is just like too absurd for me to get my head around. But I wanted to raise it with you guys for two reasons. One, just, is this a knowing troll on the part of the Biden administration? Like, just, sit there and take it. And not just because of the transgender element, which like I don't think that people really care about like transgenderism except as this wedge issue for all sorts of authoritarianism. But also just like the COVID element of it. I mean, this is adjacent to like giving Dr. Fauci the Medal of Honor, right? Like, this is a public health official. And I guess the idea here is that public health has been such a it's been so vitally important in such a crisis moment in the past year and a half that we have to award this person a 4-star admiralty for the brave efforts of taking away everybody's like civil liberties. Is this like on purpose, do you guys think?
Well, I mean, it's not. I mean, I think the Assistant Secretary of Health typically is a 4-star ad. I mean, does get this role. So it's not like unusual that, I mean, I think Rachel Levine's predecessor was also an admiral, but it's an admiral in the public health service, in like the commissioned corps. I mean, it's just this like weird little sub branch that came out of like the Marine Hospital in the 19th century. And, it's a formality. What's weird is the way it was presented. It's almost as though they were saying, well, the Chinese have a hypersonic missile, but we've got our secret weapons too. We've got like, this is our. It's kind of like when they talk about autism as a superpower. They've really. This goes back to our first topic. They've just in this inversion of reality, so that Rachel Levine, as a 4-star admiral, like, yes, she can command in the imagination of our woke elite. She can command, fleets and vessels and submarines, and this will counter the Chinese threat. But yeah, I mean, it's both. I mean, it is a real thing. I mean, they do have this formal title, and it's a massive troll.
Again, I think in answer to this question, I'm just going to encourage people to look up on Wikipedia someone by the name of Martine Rothblatt. Martine Rothblatt, fascinating individual. As good of proof as any that I could offer in the space of a podcast that the trans movement, such as it is either the same thing as cyborg transhumanism or is just going to be swallowed up by it. Martine Rothblatt's biography as I think gender reassignment surgery was in about 1994. This is a person who is largely responsible for our communications satellites infrastructure. Someone who is a highly trained aviationist. Someone who is also deeply involved in biotechnology, was responsible for the delivery of the first lung transplant by drone, and has a movement, the Terrasem movement, to boot, which is a charitable organization. And I'm just going to quote here from the wiki, since paraphrasing doesn't do it justice. Yes, it's TMI for short, poetic justice there. TMI's mission is to educate the public on the practicality and necessity of greatly extending human life, consistent with diversity and unity, via geoethical nanotechnology and personal cyber consciousness, concentrating in particular on facilitating revivals from biostasis. The movement focuses on preserving, evoking, reviving, and downloading human consciousness, achieving objectives like these through annual workshops, colloquia, online publications, grant writing, hosted events, and other forms of outreach. This is a person, Martine, who also received a PhD from a top London university, defending the doctorate before Britain's top bioethicist. So, this is not some fringoid. This is not some kooky person who's just like, I'll freeze my body and I'll live forever. No, there is a critical mass forming of very, very senior, high-performing men who have used technology ostensibly to change their biological sex, but really to become a sort of cyborg and to open the pathway to a cyborg oligarchy. If you sit one of these folks down and you try to debate them, I think that they will, they don't consider there to be any reason for shame or prevarication around this. It's, look, this is humanity's future. The only way that we're going to make it is by shedding our humanity and merging with our technology. And, right now there's just no question that, the quote unquote trans movement is at the very front of the line for, prestige and possibility for turning yourself into a kind of cyborg. I think that's obviously why it's moved to the top of the stack in the alphabet soup of the rainbow flag movement. I don't think it's a coincidence that there's a plus at the end of this movement, just like there is a plus at the end of Humanity Plus, which is another one of the leading transhuman movements. These things are converging, and it seems clear to me why it's happening. And we can see right now that the regime is positioning itself with celebrating International Pronouns Day through the State Department, and really just messaging every day, elevating these figures from the absolute fringes to the very center, the moral and ethical center of the regime. It seems pretty transparent to me what's going on, and I think that regardless of your sexual proclivity, if you care about your human identity and the human identity of others, and if you think there's something fundamentally sacred and inviolable about that identity, and you're worried about what might happen to our humanity and to our form of government, to the possibility of politics, if we hand control of our civilization over to cyborgs, then you might share my views on this.
Hey, what's funny? Just picking up on that point, it's interesting how many of these kind of certain type of trans person, the kind of super macho man who then becomes a woman. How many of them are noted helicopter pilots? Martine Rothblatt invented an electric helicopter, but also like Zoe Tur, who got into a famous squabble with Ben Shapiro on television. She was a helicopter pilot who did the OJ chase, and there was another rival helicopter pilot who also became a woman, Dana Valley. So it's interesting because the helicopter is kind of, isn't it sort of like the ultimate in like, at least, as so far as technologies come, like post-war, like cyborg exoskeleton. Like, here's this thing I can fit around myself and fly just all by myself. There's a really weird, you're right, there's a very strange marriage of biology and technology implied in all of this.
This is pretty fascinating example of life imitating art, or the recursive loop therein. Some of us may remember that the phrase "I sexually identify as an attack helicopter" was deemed to be a transphobic internet meme, typically used to parody the evolving gender spectrum. The phrase originated as a copy paste on the internet forum Reddit. Yes, Reddit strikes again.
That's right.
And it's really caught fire on 4chan. So, something to that.
This is in real time. Seth just uncovered something.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And I really like your thesis, James. I mean, what is they're basically, because they've said there's two forms of, like, two people who become trans. Like, one are kind of like very effeminate gay men, like sort of the ladyboy types. And then there's, the term for the other one is like hypergynophilia, essentially highly macho men who are aroused at the idea of themselves as women. Say like a gold medal decathlon winner, or like a someone who's part of like a space engineer. So it's very strange. I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling on that, but it's so bizarre.
No, yeah. I mean, this is something that I think Douglas Murray spent some time on in his second book. I think it's the second book, The Madness of Crowds, right? He talks about autogynophilia as this thing that was kind of recognized one half of the transgender male phenomenon, and then was effectively erased from the research because it's kind of politically incorrect to suggest that there's something, autoerotic in at least some of these cases. But I mean, yeah, like, it's kind of the ultimate, like, just shoot some heroin and, like, dude, I'm gonna, like, act on this like fetish that I have, right, to, like, turn yourself into I mean, I too am now rambling, and so instead we'll read from a piece we just published not long ago. This is part of our new feature that we're rolling out this week. The feature is called Woman versus the Machine, and it's about these issues, which James just elucidated, right? This idea that, like, peak trans somehow contains within itself the foot in the door to cyborgism, to, like, post-humanism, to just turning your body into this, or looking at your body as this assembly of parts that you can take apart and take to market and exchange and reconfigure. Mary Harrington, who's a well-known TERF, beloved TERF. I don't know if she would accept that label. I think she would. But she's written us this great piece called The Fight Against Erasing Women. And she begins with this black paper from 2018, an anonymous essay. And I'll just read the block quote that she pulls out. In 2018, this author writes, "Trans women are techno-capital, producing itself outwardly into increasingly multitudinous configurations. Trans women as we know them now are the melding of techno-capital with the human race and the expropriation of it towards its own ends. Their flesh is how the machinery beneath infiltrates the human race. It breaks these lucky few free from the horrid curse of being human towards the lesbian auto-production of demons." Which kind of evokes the video that surfaced today on Libs of TikTok, or this week on Libs of TikTok, of, demon pronouns, right? Deem self, deem, and demons are the demon pronouns that you can have if you identify as a demon. But more seriously, perhaps, right? This is kind of spelled out here, that at least one major strain of this impulse is the impulse to, turn one's own creative energies, one's sort of Faustian drive to conquer nature inward toward oneself as the sort of last frontier of, the exertion of the human will and of technological competency over the natural world. And if you are only part of that natural world, that is, if you're only a piece of meat, it's kind of a natural impulse to turn that in toward yourself.
But we should say, I mean, throughout all of this, I don't know if we've mentioned the fact that if you want to stay human forever, you should go to humanforever.us and buy
Indeed.
James's book. But there's a couple things here. I mean, think about for a minute, which I bet most people have seen in America, these freakish people who start doing body modification in order to make themselves, some kind of hybrid animal, right? And you put horns in your skull, or you discolor your skin, and so forth and so on. And it's interesting, like that is still almost low status. It's kind of interesting if you really did modify the body, but that's still like low status renegadism. Whereas there's something more transcendent in the ritual, or you perform the ritual of the trans, and then in some way you transcend up the ladder, as everyone has been saying, for a variety of reasons that I think are all fairly harmonious. And that's a very different thing. But at the back of all this, so there is something about the trans. In other words, it's like pushing this forward in an intellectual way, that other forms of body modification are not, other forms of bodily mutilation are not. It's associated with something that is a ritualistic, sacrifice of the body sexually, and then you move up the chain because of it. You ascend, and you wear the uniform. And we should be very proud that we have this, these people who are very confused, and they're now your leader. And this all started with saying, like, is that on purpose? And I don't think it's so much a purposeful conspiracy to say, in your face, we're spiking the football, as it is the positive pole, which James is pointing out, to no, we are remaking humanity. This is a serious project, and if you don't like it, you can go to hell. And we need to, we can rearrange ourselves however we see fit. And I guess last, what really strikes me about just listening to you guys talk, thinking about this discussion and all this, we've published, I have to say, a lot of good stuff on the trans issue at AmericanMind.org that I think is overall, it's been much more thought-provoking than many other sites in what we've published about this issue. We don't need to rehash this here, but there is also a certain simplicity to how we got here. And that is that even though it's astounding to look and see what's happening when it comes to the celebration of child mutilation and chemical castration of people who are obviously very confused and had nameable diagnoses, even 10 years ago. So it's very, now we're forced to accept their fetishes. We're forced to accept the whole deal. But it's not surprising that we got here, really, because if you just think about what the premises are and what the underlying issue of technology and human beings in the last century or so has been, that we think there's no such thing as human nature. It's a changeable collection of Lego blocks that once we unlock the science, we can rearrange however we want, and dare I say it, accelerate a kind of evolution. And this is, the right or the religious authorities have not really grappled with this as fully as they should. You can't just dismiss some kind of managed evolution on the part of a rational creature. On the other end of it, I do think if there's hope, it's kind of a dark hope, but if there's hope, it's that they keep on they're acting as if this leads to some kind of transcendence, when in fact it seems to lead to ugliness, disorder, and incompetence every time. And so it's the classic kind of science fiction warning. What ends up happening, and is happening now in America in real time, is that these pathetic attempts to be as gods are leading to the disfigurement of human beings, and ultimately their incapacity to act human. And that's the story we now see going on all around us. So it's either band together and be human forever, as James says, or this is just going to keep happening. Now, on the other end of it, I don't know how long it can last. It could just lead to a kind of area of a time period of actual darkness if they manage to pull everything down. But you look at these pictures, which this conversation started with this this man who wants to be a woman in charge of us in terms of health, and you can't write the parody, right? It's dystopian, and it's here and it's real.
I want to make just a quick comment about the ugliness aspect, Matt, and then we should move on to our last topic. But this is something that the right, I think, at least in certain circles, the most, you might say, vital circles of the right have become fixated on beauty, right? Human beauty, reaffirming human beauty. And I think your point is particularly apt because, beauty, the concept of beauty entails the concept of nature, right? This is why this whole thing comes along with this deconstruction of like beauty standards, right? Or there's a way that the human body, the human person looks when it's integrated, when it's flourishing, when it's, doing well, when it's fit. All of these things are like, in and of themselves contain the very concept of nature within them, that like there's some way that you're meant to be and some other way that you're not meant to be. With that, I'm going to simply commend to you this feature about technology and women. There's a Mary Harrington piece in it. There is one by Tara Tika. I'm not sure how I pronounce that, Teak or Tika. As soon as we log off from this podcast, I'm going to add another one and they'll keep rolling out. Then finally, most of all, go check out James's book at humanforever.us, where you can sign up to be the first to know when NFTs drop and get ready for sales of this book. It's very good. I should know. I have read it. The last thing we wanted to talk about is also from James tipped us off to this another sort of revelation, not hugely shocking, but still riveting, which is that Pierre Omidyar, he of eBay and various other high dollar, high prestige democratic leftist movements, has been funding and aiding the Facebook whistleblower. We talked about Frances Haugen-Dass a while back on the show as a sort of front woman for this campaign to pressure Facebook into deplatforming and censoring conservatives. Now, surprise, surprise, it turns out that among the people on Haagen-Dass's side is this fellow well known to be, deeply embedded in far left propaganda, far left funding, far left agitation. And James, I think you had a list of other people who were involved in this movement, including Meghan Markle. But could you just list off some of those names again and outline exactly who's behind this whole thing?
Yeah, this is just the fun of Wikipedia. I know that sometimes it gets some gaff for being besieged by editors who swoop in and distort reality in Wikipedia pages, but it's still a pretty good resource, especially when, as in this case, Politico, which broke this story, received a declined comment from Facebook, and Haagen's representatives did not immediately respond to a request for comment. I suspect they never will. So Politico managed to report the following. Omidyar's global philanthropic organization, Luminate, is handling Haagen's press and government relations in Europe. His foundation last year gave $150,000 to Whistleblower Aid, the nonprofit organization providing her with legal representation and advice. And most tellingly, in my opinion, her top PR representative in the U.S., former Obama spokesperson Bill Burton, runs public affairs for the nonprofit Center for Humane Technology, which sounds nice, an advocacy organization that receives funding from Omidyar. Haugen appeared on a Center for Humane Technology podcast earlier this month. Okay, so what's the Center for Humane Technology? They are the folks who are responsible for things like the Social Dilemma, various TED Talks. Tristan Harris is a guy who's closely involved. I think he was the founder of this organization. And, it all sounds very heartwarming where it's like, oh, perhaps, technology isn't automatically good for us, no matter how much of it we cram into our heads and mistake it for our own souls. Like, well, yes, that's a good point. And it's true that people across the ideological spectrum can agree that turning into cyborgs and uploading our consciousness into the cloud is not the best thing for us, and maybe even has something profoundly wrong or damaging involved in it. Nevertheless, if you scroll your way through the Who We Are page for the Center for Humane Technology, you discover a list of generous lead supporters, including not just Omidyar, but Open Society Foundations, that's Soros, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Ford Foundation. These big established international and U.S.-led foundations that shower their money across these kinds of causes, and really coordinate these kinds of activities. And then you look down through the list of founding allies, key advisors, and community. Exactly what that means, I'm not sure. You have Chris Hughes, the co-founder of Facebook, who, of course, is a dedicated lefty. You have the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. I wanted to be sure to name them correctly through their Archie Archwell Foundation, and you have, of course, all these resources at their website. But you look at who is coordinating this massive hit on Facebook at the highest levels of media and politics, and it's not some brave whistleblower who I was kept up at night worrying about how Facebook is harming America. And this is always the terminology that they use, these organizations and foundations. It's all about harm. It's about how, it's never about how technology as such can disfigure and distort human beings and make them forget that they have souls. It's always about, someone said something mean about the kind of person I am on the internet, or, there are too many beautiful people posting selfies on Instagram and it makes little girls want to kill themselves. Of course, they never, we never hear anything about the harm that is being done, whatever it may be, causing prepubescent girls to never want to mature sexually and to pile on the puberty blockers. We never hear about that kind of harm. But there's the mask is slipping off of yet another op, and there are so many of them, and they're being conducted at such a high level that it's easy for the casual observer and even the professional observer to just slip into a mode where if you see something making headlines in the mainstream media, it's because it is a PR operation. It's because it's a psychological operation. It's because it's a form of narrative warfare designed to control your minds, which, these are the same people who post these TED Talks, how social media controls your mind. And it's like, well, that's what business you're in too. And you don't like the fact that people who aren't you are doing the mind control. So, welcome to the 21st century. Marshall McLuhan was right. World War III, global guerrilla warfare, information war, where there's the boundary between civilian and combatant is blurred away completely. You do not have to be Alex Jones to think this way. This is not the time or place to litigate the wisdom of Alex Jones. You can read Marshall McLuhan, get it all there. You can get it from Jacques Ellul in his book on propaganda. This stuff has been known and well documented and explained by very intelligent, very serious academics and intellectuals for decades on end. And, if you do not catch up, I'm sorry to say you're not going to make it. So, I know I keep beating on these themes. There's a reason why they're starting to eat the news. People are realizing that, what can explain why everything's been going so wrong? What direction are we going in? What world do we live in? Well, this is the place that you have to go to if you want to understand these things. And the sooner you figure them out, the sooner you can take action. There's still lots for us to do. Lots, that for all the insanity and the attempt to concentrate financial and communications power, economic power, cultural power under the same handful of institutions and ultimately, figures. That effort is really scrambling in its own right. They're struggling to stay ahead of events that they themselves have unleashed. And they built bots that refused to follow their orders, and now it's our turn to do the same.
So, James, is this essentially like an internal struggle within Facebook that's kind of poured out? Like, okay, there's Zuckerberg and his team, and then there's others who think that Zuckerberg has too much control and that really Facebook should be turned into a, like the postal service, kind of privately run, but with like public, some sort of public-private partnership. Obviously these are all the same people, I mean, these are all people on the left. This is not any of our friends running this. So is that what it is? Is this like some kind of weird internal conflict within the Facebook tech world?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a conflict between people who are convinced that that mathematics itself is ultimately what is going to rule and order our lives and our society, and people who think that no, it's actually going to be basically our imagination. And the math uber alles people, say, yes, transhumanism is great. The only thing that makes us special is that we have this spark of consciousness that enables us to discover knowledge and propagate it into infinity. And so we need to, put all of our resources behind building machines that perfect our ability to do this one thing that makes us any better than dust floating out in the vacuum of space. And that's their project. Then you have the wokies who for all their flaws, and there are many, understand that if you can't come up with some plausible way of reasserting human control over the machines, then software is going to eat the world, and then it's going to eat us next. So their view is yes, to all the technological innovation and advancement there is. Fine, we concede it, but so long as you put a woke czar in charge of everything, then we'll be fine. Google will have AI ethicists and design ethicists, and we'll make sure, as long as it's woke, it's good. No matter how insanely the technology progresses. And you've got this battle is being fought in the hearts and minds of our ruling factions. There's a strong desire among some people to find a way to embrace the power of and. Why not both? Why can't wokeness and technocracy sort of merge into heaven on earth? And so these battles are being fought out. I mean, Peter Thiel's still on the board of Facebook. I think a lot of people involved in this are just, have been waiting for years for an opportunity to really stick it to Peter. And, they hope that this is one of those occasions. Facebook itself, Facebook is like, oh, you're right. Social media is not so great after all. Don't worry, we'll change our name. We'll become trans. We'll transition out of social media and become a metaverse company with a new name. And I think I talked about this already. Their sneak peek at Horizons, which is their first metaverse game. All of the avatars are incorporeal from the waist down. They have no legs, no secondary or primary sex characteristics, because there's no body once you get to roughly where the navel should be. I mean, I would be curious to ask these people whether these avatars even have navels. And so the movement into the metaverse signals to me that social media is this kind of mutant or hybrid technology between television and between digital, and it's not sustainable. It's not tenable. And so the critics of Facebook from the left don't want to delete Facebook, just make it go away. They want Facebook to become the infrastructure for a metaverse social credit system where, it doesn't matter how much your life sucks, as long as in the Fediverse, the sort of federally run, the official metaverse, you can present yourself however you want, and you can have whatever experiences you want. And you can, sort of exist in this cyborg vivarium, willfully paying in social credit for the privilege of living in this kind of Potemkin infinity fantasy land. And so all this stuff is being played out very quickly as private sector and public sector people at the top of the U.S. regime are desperate to prevent a populist backlash against their collapsing form of rule, and are desperate to find a way to go to digital war against China, which is manning up quite literally in response to the penetration of Western online norms into Chinese society. It doesn't like it, wants to get rid of it, and for now has the upper hand.
One thing that really strikes me is what you describe in some way is the ideas or principles behind which arise from the construction of things, which arise from what digital, what TV are. But there's it's not a one-on-one. Like what James is describing is obviously not like everyone is consciously understanding their part in this as they move forward. But the smarter people do have a philosophical understanding of what they're doing and what they're about. And one thing, I mean, I hate to say this publicly, just because some of a lot of people in tech can have a blind spot. They have a blind spot here. But the problem is that there's not an old school understanding of what human nature is, what human beings are, and therefore what the structures of regimes are that the different kinds of structures you can create that can work, and what their downsides are when it comes to human beings in a network, a community. And if you either have ignorance of these things and the lie that somehow you can create technology that brings us together and that helps construct human community, and you can just be neutral about it, and it's just about efficiency and what works, which is just fallacious, just wrong, and that's dangerous for you to have if you actually believe it. Or you actually have some of these, what James is talking about, which is an increasingly conscious and publicly stated effort to reconstruct human beings and reset all of our politics, et cetera, et cetera. So what's lacking here is something that both on the Claremont side, the New Founding side, we talk to people all the time and it's what's lacking is a positive vision of how to employ technology in a way that's pro-human, that leads to a better way of life, that leads to human communities and serves them. And the call of James' book, this is something that no one is talking about. No one is painting a positive vision of a network online that actually incorporates the concept of the common good, that understands you're going to need some kind of mixed regime in terms of governance. And that's disturbing as hell. But again, we shouldn't be surprised because we've kept this kind of education in kind of backwater places, and it's been kept alive by people, and God bless them for it. But it's just kind of out there, and we're reaping the benefits, and we're getting slaughtered intellectually on this front because where are the churches and where are the political leaders who are thinking about these things and not only able to just see the problem, but then are also able to construct a real solution underneath it all? Well, they're few and far between. But a lot of them are just instinctually in the right place. They still need to be led to see and articulate what's going on and what should be done. And that's terrifying. But hey, I mean, it's also gratifying part of podcasts and communities like this who are actually talking.
Well, once again, I don't know if this is a function of just my shameless instinct to shill all of our projects all the time, or if it just happens naturally that every time we get to the end of an episode, I feel as if we've organically made an advertisement for all of our various endeavors. But I do believe, actually, that, Matt, you've just articulated exactly what it is that Claremont hopes to add to the conversation. I mean, not just I say that as if it's some sort of, one of the various options in the bucket, but we really believe that this is central, right? I mean, you can't talk about being human without talking about human nature. You can't talk about beauty without nature. You can't talk about the regime without some sense of natural right to guide you in what will soon become, if it isn't already, an undifferentiated infinite sea of options, malleability, and possibilities. We hope to be your guides through that in a number of various ways, not just with James's forthcoming book, which you can learn about at humanforever.us, but also with Matt's project at newfounding.com, and of course, everything that we do here at Claremont. Thank you for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to support our work, visit claremont.org/donate. And if you want to learn more about all our projects and writing, visit our websites at americanmind.org, claremont.org, claremontreviewofbooks.com, and our brand new Washington, D.C. based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. I should probably stop saying brand new at a certain point, or they're going to start feeling like the new kids on the block in perpetuity, but they're still awesome. So you should check them out. Please rate, share, and subscribe at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to the production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Annalisa Lee. And thank you all for listening. Talk to you next week.